I've found over the years that quite a few people have questions or confusions about my academic career, and that's perfectly understandable since I have held more than 10 positions over the last, 20 odd years of various teaching and research and other things. And I've done so not just in academic areas, but also with educational startups. So if you've followed me in the last 10 years, you've probably seen quite a few changes, and you might be wondering what's going on. So I'm going to give an entire back history of where I've taught, what I was teaching, how things were going, why I moved from that position to the other, because it might be of interest to some. And I think for quite a few people who know me well, there's going to be, as it turns out, gaps in what they actually knew about where I was. And so this could be helpful in a number of ways, or at the least, maybe interesting and entertaining. So let me start by saying where I currently teach and what position I hold. So I teach at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, just about a mile from where I'm shooting this video. And I'll say this too, it's the best place that I've ever taught. And so, that says a lot given how many places I've actually been to and seen from the inside. And I hold it might be oxymoronic rank of adjunct professor. So you might say, well, how can you be both an adjunct and a professor? MyEd has tracks not just for professors going from assistant to associate to full professor. They also have tracks for adjuncts, and you get, pay raises along the way and, a certain rank. And I came in as an adjunct full professor because of my many years of teaching experience and publications and service work and stuff like that. So I can't actually proceed any further, but it goes adjunct lecturer, and then you have to apply for, an increase to adjunct assistant professor, adjunct associate professor, adjunct full professor. So that's how that works. And adjunct and MyEd is its own kind of different universe because it is a school of art and design, a professional school that, grants college degrees, but it's primarily geared towards artists and designers. And so people like me, we're teaching in the humanities and writing program, and you could say helping them out along the way to become well-rounded practitioners. Now, since we've got the present, let's go all the way back in time to the distant past. And I'm going to break this up into a bunch of different sections. So the first thing to talk about is where I went to graduate school at Southern Illinois University and where I taught while I was down there. One of the really great things about the philosophy program at Southern Illinois University, and I think this was, similar to the other programs in other graduate departments there, which was kind of a powerhouse for a while, was that if you wanted to, there were many ways to get lots of teaching experience, and that's part of what I did. Now, the first 3 years that I was there, I didn't teach at all because I had won a fellowship, the DeLeet Morris Fellowship, and that gave me, free tuition, a stipend. I still had to pay, fees and stuff, but it was enough to live on for me. And then after that finished, I began TAing. That's being a teaching assistant for various professors, and I did that for a logic class with George Sadler, and I did that for an intro to philosophy class with my mentor Garth Gillen. And being a TA meant you were sort of like a teacher light, right? There'd be a big lecture section with 200 to 300 students in it, and then you would have your breakout sessions, usually on like Fridays or Thursdays later in the week, and you would teach that little 20 to 25 person section. But you're teaching what the teacher was teaching, right? And so I did that for logic and then, intro to philosophy. But intro to philosophy is a little bit different because Garth wanted us to get teaching experience. So he built it into the syllabus that 2 of the lectures in the course of the semester would be given by each TA. So you had to present to this massive auditorium what he was doing. So I did that, and then after a while, they would trust you with your own class, and they began by giving me sections of ethics to teach. And you'd have to pick out your textbook and arrange your syllabus and figure out how you were going to do assignments. You'd have a little bit of guidance if you asked for it, but otherwise you were kind of just thrown into it. And I taught ethics twice, beginning in 1999. And then I was slated to teach a higher level class called Philosophy of Politics, Law, and Justice. And I thought that was so cool. Around that time, my mother died, and I began having to go up to Milwaukee to handle her funeral and arrangements and estate and house and all that sort of stuff, and then come back. So that class, I actually had a few of my fellow classmates take over sections, but I saw it through to the end. And then I didn't teach for a little while because I got a dissertation research award to work on things, but I already had 3 of my own classes under my belt at that time. My last semester there, I was kind of fortunate in that I'd run out of funding by that time. So I had the inheritance and I could draw upon that. And I began teaching for Southeastern Illinois College, which was about maybe 45 minutes down the road from Carbondale, going due east. I forget which town it's in, but it's a community college. And so I knew one of my friends who was in the English department. His wife was a professor there, and she was like, hey, we need somebody to teach philosophy classes. Do you think you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, sounds good. So I would ride in with her. We arranged our schedules so they worked out well. I think maybe not every day, but most days. And then I would teach twice a week, Introduction to Philosophy, ethics, and world religions. And this was great because it was giving me more staple classes that you need. And I only did that for a semester. I finished my dissertation, graduated, and then we moved to Northwestern Indiana, and that's where the second part of the story begins. My family has had land in northwestern Indiana near DeMotte and Rose Lawn off of Highway 10 since the 1930s. And there's a lot to say about that. Maybe I'll talk about that somewhere else. It's a quite interesting story. Suffice it to say, there's you could call it a compound, Chez Lemrise, right? The Lemrise place. And there's 3 houses there that my grandparents and great aunts and great uncles built as retirement homes. And by the time that I was finishing up graduate school, my grandmother and grandpa were still alive. My Aunt Tunny was still alive, but she was suffering from Alzheimer's and had basically moved out of her house in with my Aunt Bibian, who was a nurse, and they were essentially taking care of her. My grandfather was also suffering from Alzheimer's and eventually had to be put in a retirement home. But, at that time I was heavily involved with my family. This is my mother's side of the family. And by that time I was also married. I had my oldest daughter, she was born in 2002. And so by the time I'm graduating, I'm a family man, and I have to think about where I'm going to go. So what often happens with academics is they say, well, I'll go wherever the jobs are. And I thought about that, and I was like, I really want to be where my family is. I've got these connections throughout my life to this land. Wouldn't it be nice to move in there? So I used what was left of my inheritance to buy one of the houses, and we moved in. And then the question was, okay, what am I going to do for work? So I sent out cover letters and CVs to every college, university that offered philosophy classes within what I thought to be a 2-hour driving radius. And I was like, well, we'll see what happens. And I got some responses right away. Indiana University Northwest, based up in Gary, asked me if I could teach a professional ethics class for them, which was actually at a high school because part of continuing education rather than on the main campus. Manchester College, way out in eastern Indiana, about 2 hours drive, booked me in to teach 2 ethics classes. And so I was like, well, looks like this will be more or less it for the time being. I did interview for Lewis University, now that I recall, and they wanted people to teach like in the Chicagoland area, so that was a possibility. And then I got a call from Ball State University, and it was from the chair of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department, Julie Eflin, and she said, hey, this is a little bit unusual, but do you think you would be interested in teaching up in Michigan City at Indiana State Prison? We have a 4-year degree program, prison education. The prisoners don't get a philosophy degree, but they can minor in philosophy or religious studies, which, by the way, you have to teach both of those. And they get a degree in general studies. And, the guy who was working up at Indiana State Prison, he's leaving all of a sudden. Do you think you'd want to take his place? And I was like, what's the deal? She said, well, you'll be an assistant professor. You're a member of the department. And this will be like your full-time gig. And I thought about it, and I was like, how many classes am I going to teach? And she said, well, he's slated for 5. And I was like, wow, I've already got 3 classes elsewhere, and the 5, is this doable? And I was like, well, maybe for a semester it is. I'll try it out, right? So that was a very intense semester. I stepped into the classes that he had scheduled, which included Religion in American Life, Intro to Philosophy, World Religions, Jesus and the Gospel, Traditions, which was an upper-level class, and then there was another, maybe there were 2 sections of Religion and American Culture. So I had a lot of preps, a lot of different things to do. And after that semester, I didn't teach for Indiana University Northwest anymore or for Manchester College. And I just taught for Ball State in their prison program. And I will say this, it was very tough but very rewarding. I mean, physically, the place was filled with mold, so my allergies were killing me. I had to get inserts for my shoes because walking on concrete all the time was kind of rough. You were constantly having to shout above HVAC and fans and stuff like that. My vocal cords would get so strained. By the way, the classes were all anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on the prison schedule, once a week. And so like Mondays, I would teach 3 classes with a break in between, and I could be teaching anywhere from 7 to 9 hours where I'm talking the entire time. So I would bring in Ricola and sip hot tea and stuff like that. And it was great. It gave me an academic position. I was full-time. Unfortunately, as I found out later, I was not eligible because I was in extended education for tenure or promotion, because my chair told me, look at all these publications you've got, we would be promoting you to associate professor, but my hands are tied. But it was a job, and I really enjoyed talking with the students and the freedom to teach the things that I wanted to teach. It gave me a huge, vast background in teaching a whole bunch of philosophy classes and religious studies classes, and it lasted for 6 years. Unfortunately, the state of Indiana in 2008 very suddenly decided to make the prisoners ineligible for the low-income student grant that they were getting. It was always rather unpopular politically, although it was prison education is very good for reducing the recidivism rate, the rate of people going back to prison committing further crimes. It's one of the most cost-effective measures we actually have. But Indiana is, a red state, and they were against that sort of thing. And so they finally got rid of it. So I had to get on the job market very, very late. I had been interviewing for other jobs along the way while I was at Indiana State Prison teaching there. I had a Catholic Studies job up at University Illinois of Chicago that I was in the running for. I got to the top 4, interviewed, didn't get it. I went out to Steubenville, interviewed there. There were other interviews as well, but I didn't get them. And so in late 2007, I had to get on the job market a little bit behind everybody else. And that's how I wound up in the second academic position that I would take down in North Carolina. The way people now get hired in the academic job market is a bit different than the way it used to be back then. You know, sometimes back then you could have a Skype interview, although that was pretty much a rarity, and it depended how tech savvy the department was. Generally, you had to go to the American Philosophical Association, which was in between Christmas and New Year's, terrible time of the year, and do your initial interviews there with all the other people in, you know, like a giant room, and the people doing the interviews would have to do, like, you know, anywhere from 10 to 18 interviews over a couple days, and then it would go to the next thing. You'd wait for like an email or a phone call. You know, we'd like to do a follow-up. Can you come to campus to do an interview and that sort of thing? And I had a couple interviews at the APA, including with Ball State. One of the professors was actually pretty hostile to the writing sample that I'd submitted. Kind of a jerk, actually. Didn't go any further with that. I did get an interview with St. Anselm's College, where I was giving the St. Anselm lecture that year, so they kind of rolled those in together. And the people that were really into Anselm were really into me, and I think a lot of the other people were not. The department was in a considerable flux. I did get 2 job offers, and one was locally. It was at a place that, if I remember correctly, was in or near Joliet, so about 45 minutes drive, and it was a community college. And I was going to be, you know, teaching philosophy and religious studies classes. And it's interesting because that would have been a union position and like guaranteed pay raises and stuff like that. So this is 2008. Remember that date. The other was at Fayetteville State University in North Carolina, and it was for a mixed department called Government and History, which included some philosophy people, but it didn't have a philosophy major. And basically what you were doing is teaching critical thinking classes. But, you know, they offered more money. It was a university, so the worry was, and this is a well-founded worry, if I went to that community college, it might be very difficult to ever get out of there and get another position again. Because, you know, a lot of hiring is based not just on where you went to. Going to Southern Illinois University as opposed to going to University of Chicago, it puts you at a disadvantage. Publications even those things out, because I had lots of publications. But where you're currently teaching can also be viewed as, you know, a feather in the cap or as a mark against you. So I thought, well, I'll do this. I'll go down to the south to North Carolina, take up this position here at this historically black university, and it'll be going like going on military deployment. I'll leave my family up there in Indiana on, you know, the family land, and I will, you know, come back for breaks and, you know, whenever I can, and I'll live in a little apartment down there and, you know, do my job, and then, you know, plan to, like, you know, spend the whole summer, because who the hell wants to spend the summer in a place as hot as Fayetteville? Go back up to Indiana. Now, what ended up happening were a couple interconnected, let's call them challenges or catastrophes. First of all, the economy melted down, right? 2008. So I went down there, and by the way, Fayetteville State University, totally dysfunctional at the time. They were in the process of firing the chancellor and replacing her with a new chancellor who was also not very good, and kind of a stuffed shirt type. His chief of staff was extraordinary, and he actually ran the place. But there was so much wrong with the institution. We didn't have contracts when we got down there. We didn't have offices, and yet we were required to hold office hours. And every time you'd ask a question, the people would be like, well, you just got to understand the institutional culture down here. It's a little bit different than what you're used to up north. And I would just get infuriated, right? So there's all of that stuff. And I also wound up first getting separated and then getting divorced. Things broke down, and in order to actually be able to get to see my kids, I had to start divorce proceedings. And so there was all of that going on. And I would go on the job market while I was at Fayetteville State University. I didn't really want to stay there, although I got really wrapped up in a lot of things because, I found out I was good at certain things. They found out I was good at it. And so they would detail me. I wound up in the academic senate. I started a ethics and business education project with the School of Business and Economics that, helped them get through their reaccreditation. I got involved in the entire reaccreditation thing and helped write the 10-year quality enhancement plan. One entire chapter is what I wrote, and I had a part in the others. I defended the plan to SACS, which is the reaccreditors. I was involved in and then ran university-wide assessment of student learning. So I was getting pretty well positioned there. But something else happened that changed the trajectory of where I was going entirely and led to me moving somewhere else. The next stop for me was to move up to New York and into the Hudson Valley, specifically to Kingston, which is on the west side of the river. And I started teaching for a place on the east side of the river called Marist College. And I started teaching as an adjunct. Now, why would I leave a position where I had job security? I was involved in all these different things. I was actually up for early tenure and early promotion if I had stayed. Well, because I fell in love. And it was with somebody who I knew from high school. I think many of you know this story. Andy Shaka and I went to Catholic Memorial High School together. We met when I was a sophomore and she was a freshman. She actually dated a guy who was at that time my arch rival. And then, we lose track of each other. We cross paths again, living here in Milwaukee in the 1990s, both of us working at a building just blocks from here called the 100 East Building. And, flirted with each other, didn't really recognize who each other were, saw each other constantly. Then we lose track of each other again. And then it is late 2009. And she keeps popping up on Facebook as hey, maybe you should friend request this person. So I do. And then we start talking. And within a month, we have, and by talking, I mean writing to each other. This is before we even talked on the phone. We fall in love. We decide we're going to get married. We start thinking about plans. We begin talking on the phone. And by summer, I have gone up there and we have met each other face to face again for the first time in decades. We go to a conference in Toronto together and we start doing all sorts of things. Then we begin the long distance part of our relationship where I would fly from Fayetteville, not actually Fayetteville, I had to drive up to Raleigh and then take a plane from there to JFK in New York City, and then she would drive down and pick me up, and we'd drive up to the Hudson Valley, and we'd have 48 hours together and then drive back down and do the whole thing all over again. And after a while that got kind of old, and we're like, listen, we're in our 40s, screw this long distance stuff. You're not coming down to the south. This place is messed up. I'll go up there by you. And she had a solid gig as a assistant dean at the Culinary Institute of America. She founded the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. You can tell she's a real go-getter, right? So she had taught at Marist College previously, and she said, "Why don't you adjunct at Marist College? It's a decent place to go." So I started doing that, and I started teaching Intro to Philosophy and Ethics for them. Eventually, I taught religion and American culture, and you've probably seen those videos from my early classes. And I did apply for full-time positions in various places, but by then the job market had really dried up. We're still not out of the financial crisis in 2011 when I moved up there. And, I just kept teaching for Marist. Eventually I transitioned, actually very early on, my second semester there, I start teaching online for them. Because I could take my videos and the very rich resources that I provided in my course management system, I begin teaching online. And, I start doing all sorts of other things. I get involved in educational startups. Obviously, I spend a lot of time shooting YouTube videos. I begin building my own business, Reason.io, while I'm there, originally so that I can get tax write-offs for public speaking. And then I start tutoring, and then I get philosophical counseling certification and training, and I begin doing that. And then I start doing consulting for businesses, and so that went on for quite a while. We were there from 2011 to 2015. And then Andy's job changed, and she became a consultant rather than an employee of the Culinary Institute of America, which meant that we could now move back here to Milwaukee. We didn't have to be there in New York anymore. And we were like, yeah, let's come home. So, with our 2 dogs and cat and our, who knows how many books we had 99 bankers boxes worth of books. We prepared for moving out. Now, I continued teaching for Marist, though. I kept that because I was teaching online. And by that time, I was teaching a different class, which I've actually replicated in my teachable study with Sadler Academy, called Worldviews and Values, which is sort of like an introduction to philosophy class, except it's got some other twists to it as well. So we reach the final chapter in this long story, the Milwaukee years, which I'm still in at present. And when I first got back here, I was still teaching for Marist College, generally 1 class per semester. And I was, shooting the YouTube videos. I began podcasting. I was working on some, educational startup stuff. And I was working with businesses as well, starting to do executive coaching and other things along those lines, ethics consulting, doing a lot of tutorial work as well. So I had my Marist sideline, and then I had my business stuff over here. And then the first main place that I started teaching for, and I believe this was in 2017 in the fall semester, was Marquette University. And the way that ended up happening was I had done some presentations at Marquette for the philosophy department, and my friend Owen over there, he said, hey, we've got a visiting assistant professor position. Why don't you interview for it? And I did, and in the interview I found out that they were paying essentially peanuts, and the interview basically was over at that point because I was like, no. They also had a non-compete clause, so I'd have to close down my tutorials and not teach for anyone else. And I was like, you can't live on that here in the city with what you're offering. And so I was like, that's that for Marquette. And then within like a week, they emailed me and said, do you think you could teach as an adjunct for us? We've got these ethics classes, and the provost is playing around with class sizes and shrinking them, so we now have a lot more sections that we have to fill. Do you think you could help us out? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. So I start, walking to Marquette in the mornings 2 days a week and teaching over there. And I've got an office that I'm sharing with the other adjuncts, most of whom are graduate students. And so it's kind of fun to be like in a university again, not just a college, but a real university, access the library, all that kind of stuff. So I'm teaching at Marquette, and that was like a pretty reliable continuing gig, and they pay pretty well for adjunct teaching. And then I got solicited by Carthage College down in Kenosha, wanting to know if I could teach some philosophy classes for them, particularly business ethics, which I was also teaching at Marquette. And I was like, yeah, I like teaching business ethics. I think it's actually really important. So I began teaching one class a semester down there at Carthage as well. You notice what's going on. By that time, Marist becomes unreliable, and it's also messing up our taxes because it winds up having to pay, Wisconsin tax and New York tax. So we're like, we're done with Marist. So now I've got a couple places I'm teaching. I also apply at Milwaukee Area Technical College, in part because people are like, oh man, that's a really great gig. If you get in there, pays well, it's reliable. As it turned out, that was true 10 years before, but like a lot of places where people took too many liberties, then they clamped down and everything became very bureaucratic. That was the most dysfunctional place I've ever taught for. There was no onboarding. They have all these crazy practices and processes. The website was a total mess and unhelpful. People would just the schedules are just like schedule you for classes without consulting you. It didn't pay well. But I taught there for a number of semesters. And then I also I began teaching in 2018 for Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. So by this time, I got lots of teaching. As a matter of fact, I'm turning down classes because I'm, a reliable teacher, and they need the people to teach these classes. And so I'm teaching one class here or two classes here, and they're asking me, can you do more for us? And the only one I didn't turn down classes for was Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design because I really, really liked working there. But, Carthage began kind of souring on me. Same thing with Milwaukee Area Technical College. As a matter of fact, they didn't even begin. They started to sour. And, Marquette, it was okay, And then COVID hit, right? So with Marquette, that meant that enrollment went down and a lot of things dried up. I did teach two sections in 2020 of business ethics online, and that was the last that I taught for Marquette. Milwaukee Area Technical College was already a mess, and COVID made them even more of a mess, but I kept teaching for them. I also taught prison students for them, I should mention, in the Second Chance Pell program. But then I left that because it was so badly managed as well. It's too bad because I thought it was a great program. It's just it was poorly put together and poorly managed. So, I started paring things away. Marquette went away. Carthage wanted me to teach more for them. They would have had me. I did teach two classes one semester for them online. And during the pandemic, they were all about going online. And then as soon as they thought it was safe, they wanted everything to go away from online. And I was like, listen, I'm high risk. My wife is even higher risk. I'm not going down to campus to teach classes for you. I'm happy to teach online if you want me to. And that continued all the way to the end of this last academic year. And so I started, Marquette went away, Carthage, the writing was on the wall. They also eliminated their philosophy program, and so I was there basically to help them finish out the majors. And I decided to just quit teaching for Milwaukee Area Technical College. So now I've just got the one gig as of the end of this spring semester. I've only got the one gig teaching for Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. Quite happy with that because not teaching as many classes as an adjunct for these other places means I can concentrate on other things like my study with Sadler Academy or Light Hall platform classes or listenable classes or, continuing my client work in tutorials, philosophical counseling, ethics consulting, and all these other things as well. So that is the story, and this spans, more than 20 years, starting down in Carbondale, Illinois, finishing up here in Milwaukee, a whole bunch of different universities, colleges on the way that I have taught for. And now you got the whole scoop up to today. Things could change in semesters to come, but now you know where I've been, what I've done, who I've taught for, why I quit teaching for them, why I moved on to other things. You got the full story.